Hello and welcome to The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Tunisia's president named the country's first female prime minister, appointing a 63-year-old professor to lead a transitional government after the head of state sacked the previous prime minister and suspended parliament. BOUDEN Ramadan appears to be the first woman appointed as head of government in an Arab League nation. Will this appointment be the first step to solve the political crisis in Tunisia? Russia threatened to block YouTube, and the Kremlin called for zero tolerance towards the video hosting giant after it removed Russian state-backed broadcaster RT's German-language channels from its site. The online video company deleted Russian state-backed broadcaster RT's German-language channels, saying they had breached its COVID-19 misinformation policy. How will this information warfare affect relations between Germany and Russia? And the United Nations humanitarian chief says that the crisis in Ethiopia is a stain on our conscience as children and others starve to death in the Tigray region under what the United Nations has called de facto government blockade of food, medical supplies and fuel. Martin Griffiths issued one of the most sharply worded criticisms to date of the worst famine situation in decades, calling on Ethiopia's incoming new government to lead the country away from the abyss that it is peering into. And these are the top three topics that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. Tunisia's President Kais Saied has long been revered by the people of his country for his old-school style and communication with ordinary citizens, a stark change from the old political class. But who is Kais Saied? Our following infographic explains. Tunisian President Kais Saied has appointed the country's first female prime minister to form a cabinet as soon as possible, 2 months after controversially unseating the previous premier and suspending parliament.
عايشك مرحبا بك عايشك تفضل. قررت تكليفكم بتشكيل حكومة جديدة.
Tunisian President Kais Saied named NAJLA BOUDEN Ramadan, a little-known university engineer with World Bank experience, as Prime Minister on Wednesday, nearly 2 months after he seized most powers in a move his foes called a coup. Ramadan, Tunisia's first woman Prime Minister, will take office at a moment of crisis, with the democratic gains won in a 2011 revolution in doubt as a major threat looms to public finances. A geological engineer, Ramadan was responsible for implementing World Bank projects at the Education Ministry, but she has little experience of government.
وسنعمل معا إن شاء الله في المستقبل بإرادة وعزيمة ثابتة للقضاء على الفساد وللقضاء على الفوضى التي عمت الدولة في عديد المؤسسات سياسية واقتصادية واجتماعية وغيرها.
SAEID dismissed the previous Prime Minister, suspended Parliament and assumed wide executive powers in July and has been under growing domestic and international pressure to form a new government. Last week he brushed aside much of the constitution, saying he could rule by decree and control the government himself during an emergency period that has no defined endpoint. Tunisia faces a rapidly looming crisis in public finances after years of economic stagnation were aggravated by the coronavirus pandemic and political infighting. Government bonds are under pressure and the cost of insuring against their default has hit a record high. The new government will have to move very quickly to seek financial support for the budget and debt repayments after SAEID's power grab in July put talks with the International Monetary Fund on hold. However, after SAEID's announcement last week that the government will be responsible to the president and that he can select or sack cabinet ministers, the role of Prime Minister will be less important than in previous administrations. Most of Tunisia's previous political elite, including most parties in the suspended parliament, have said they oppose SAEID's power grab.
I'm now joined live by Dr. Yusra Ghannouchi, who's the NAJLA Party International spokesperson. Dr. Ghannouchi, thank you for joining us here again today on A News. Before we talk about this, the designation for the new Prime Minister, can we just set the scene for those that don't know what's been happening in Tunisia? Could you just recap for us what is the situation regarding the government in the country?
As you know, on the 25th of July, so over 2 months ago, President Kais Saied made these unconstitutional announcements that he was dismissing the government, dismissing the Prime Minister, and closing down Parliament, supposedly on the basis of Article 80 of the Constitution, which allows the President in the state of imminent danger to national security to activate this article. But this very same article does not allow him to take the actions that he announced. So those actions are completely in violation of the Constitution and are, in our view, null and void. Since then, the President continued, despite all our calls to restore democracy, he continued to violate the Constitution, exclude everyone, and refuse to listen to calls to dialogue, to coming together in an inclusive dialogue that brings together all political parties, all civil society and national organizations and unions to bring Tunisia out of its crisis. Further, on the 22nd of September, the President ended any pretense of working within the Constitution, as he had been for 2 months, by suspending most of the Constitution and announcing his very own custom-made constitution that basically grants him all powers, all executive powers. He will be the one to appoint every single minister and head the Council of Ministers and set all state policies and legislate by decrees rather than having legislation done by elected representatives of the people in Parliament. He continued the suspension of Parliament indefinitely. So we have now a confirmation that this is a coup against Tunisia's democracy. This is a power grab where we have all legislative, executive and judicial powers in the hands of one man. This is very dangerous for Tunisia's democracy, and this threatens taking us back to the very dictatorship that Tunisians rose against 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And we quite understand the language of it being, you're describing it as a coup, all the power in one place. Now, this tremendous pressure is being put on Tunisia to restore the constitutional situation. Is this why he has now designated a new Prime Minister? And is that the reason for the timing behind this? And
possibly. The President, as clear from his all his speeches, all his actions, and the constitution that expresses his will and his view of how the system should be run. That is, everything being decided by himself. However, as you have said, there has been tremendous pressure from within Tunisia, from the political spectrum, from more or less all Tunisian political parties, except very few, by civil society organizations, as well as by the international community, to reverse his course, to restore respect for the constitution, to appoint a prime minister who should be given confidence by parliament, and a prime minister who has a strong background, a competent prime minister who will be able to focus urgently on Tunisia's economic and health priorities. So this is the background of this appointment. It is an attempt to avoid the real needs of Tunisia. And it is, unfortunately, an attempt to whitewash this coup, to present it as a pseudo-democracy, and to use a woman. Unfortunately, I would have been very proud and happy to have a woman as the first prime minister in Tunisia's history, but a prime minister with legitimacy and with real powers. This is not the case, unfortunately. We have someone being chosen simply, according to the 22nd of September announcement, someone who will simply make suggestions to the president, while the president continues to be the one who makes all the decisions.
Now, it's interesting you should say that you need a strong leader with experience and so on, but this doesn't quite describe what I've read about NAJLA BOUDEN ROMDHANE. What her experience is limited, I think, in government to education, and her background is as a geologist. So, in other circumstances, would she be an appropriate candidate for Prime Minister?
She's absolutely not the right candidate that we had hoped for in terms of experience. Tunisia faces very urgent problems, particularly financial, economic. As you know, the consequences of the pandemic as well. We are still suffering from those issues, and we need a government and a prime minister that can focus on those, as well as the issue of competence. Any prime minister and any minister or government that does not acquire the vote of confidence of the legitimate elected parliament is an illegitimate and illegal government. So that is something that will not be acceptable and will only cause further problems. So instead of continuing to insist on going further in this illegal, illegitimate, unconstitutional path, we continue to pull on the president to reverse this, and we are working alongside others to ensure that Tunisia does not go further into the path of authoritarianism, but returns to the path of democracy.
And the irony here is that President Kais Saied says he'll work with ROMDHANE with determination to combat corruption and chaos, and yet this imposition of a prime minister rather than the constitutional election or democratic election of one goes against that. Is there hope for things to be put back on course in the near future?
Continuing to violate the constitution and continue this power grab with a complete disregard for the constitution that Tunisia's elected representatives almost unanimously approved in 2014 is the very embodiment of chaos that the president is talking about. And what Tunisia needs now is the voice of reason, to listen to all the voices that are calling for a return to democracy, for an inclusive dialogue that brings everyone, all political players, all civil society, all state institutions, to end this crisis and enable us all to focus on Tunisia's real problems.
Well, Dr. Yusra Ghannouchi, thank you for bringing us up to date. Let's hope that Tunisia's problems are addressed swiftly and a return to democracy happens as soon as possible. Tunisia has been without a head of government and in limbo since SAEID froze the country's parliament and seized the executive powers on the 25th of July. He said that he acted to save the country amid unrest over financial troubles and the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Coming weeks will show how much power BOUDEN will be able to yield due to the president's actions. For now, let's move on to our next topic to talk about YouTube's ban of Russian broadcaster RT. Russia has threatened to ban YouTube if it does not reinstate 2 German language channels backed by the Russian state that were deleted for violating its COVID misinformation policy. Our following infographic has more about this recent dispute. YouTube has announced it's deleting vaccine misinformation and conspiracy theories from the popular video sharing platform.
YouTube will block all anti-vaccine content, moving beyond its ban on false information about the COVID vaccines to include content that contains misinformation about other approved vaccines. Examples of content that won't be allowed on YouTube include claims that the flu vaccine causes infertility and that the MMR shot, which protects against measles, mumps and rubella, can cause autism. The online video company owned by Alphabet is also banning channels associated with several prominent anti-vaccine activists. The moves come as YouTube and other tech giants like Facebook and Twitter have been criticised for not doing enough to stop the spread of false health information on their sites. But even as YouTube takes a tougher stance on misinformation, it faces backlash around the world. On Tuesday, Russian state-backed broadcasters RT's German language channels were deleted from YouTube, as the company said the channels had breached its COVID-19 misinformation policy. Russia on Wednesday called the move unprecedented information aggression and threatened to block YouTube. In Berlin, a German government spokesman said that the government had taken note of YouTube's decision.
Das ist eine Entscheidung von YouTube. Und die Bundesregierung oder Vertreter der Bundesregierung haben mit dieser Entscheidung nichts zu tun. Wer das also behauptet, der bastelt sich eine Verschwörungstheorie zurecht.
German security services have said they consider RT's German service to be a propaganda arm of the Russian state.
And I'm joined live from Berlin in Germany by Olaf Bernke, who's a European policy expert and political analyst. Olaf, thank you for joining us here again on The Edge. I predicted a few days ago that we'd be speaking again soon. I didn't expect it to be quite so soon. But on a different subject from before, it's a week now since the German elections, and we were expecting to be continuing talking about that. But today, YouTube has banned the German language RT channel. What can you tell us about this this deletion of the channel?
Yeah, it was kind of a news because as it was portrayed in your feature, that there was a lot of criticism of RT or Russia Today as it formerly had been called here in Germany, for being exactly one of the main state-sponsored channels which were spreading misinformation, especially on the COVID pandemic, but also a lot of diverse stuff on the elections. They have seen in recent weeks, and we have a couple of studies on this, that RT Germany emerged to become the most viewed and visited online website and news website, even far beyond most of the most popular German news outlets online. And why that? Because at some point they realized that if they cover all these very critical corona demonstrations, from all these anti-vaccine demonstrations we have seen over a month now in Germany. There's a movement called the Querdenker, so the people actually who are disagreeing with the mainstream. And RT had live streaming of these channels, and giving the floor to popular anti-vaccine populists, and which were also very close to some of the right extremist movements here. And YouTube had warned RT Germany and had given them, according to their official community standards, a strike, saying you cannot do this, you violated the community standards. So they had been banned for a week, and RT, instead of following this ban, had created a second channel. They used one of their most prominent shows called The Missing Part, and made this a new YouTube channel, and streamed and broadcasted the very same program they used to broadcast in the main channel, which was banned due to violating the community standards. So both incidents then had been taken by YouTube as the argument to say, okay, we will ban you from the platform because you violated again and again community standards, and this way actually we have no other choice. It is not a single, it's not really a single case. We also have seen other prominent anti-vaccine outlets, German ones, and individuals who used YouTube for spreading their infodemic messages, and they had also been banned from YouTube. So it's not a single case, and in that regard, if you put it in the context, then what we see right now is that Russia is using that incident to, exactly as it was portrayed, so to make this a propaganda case. They inserted all these very military-like language. This would be a warfare against Russia and so on. But that's, from an analytical point of view, I can't share actually that's not the case.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because I know from growing up in the UK that for a pop group to become successful, one of the best things that can happen to it would be for it to be banned, for its song to be banned. Now, it almost seems as though from what you described, creating a second channel, ignoring the warnings and so on, this, in a sense, is a PR exercise to boost ratings in the future for RT. Is that how you read it?
No, I think it's sort of, in general, I would say it could work like a PR strategy if it wouldn't be purely about politics. So if we put this in a perspective, then we have seen not just starting, but there was the most obvious incidents in the 2016 elections in the United States that Russian state and sponsored actors, and the entire Russian-sponsored media environment belongs to this. We have also seen this. So my very own foundation, the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, we had covered the German elections. We also covered the recent elections in Georgia and Europe in October last year. And we have seen the very same incidents there. You have a very pro-Russian media environment financed by Russian sources, very Kremlin near sources. And they have done exactly the same. They had also been banned from some of the platforms, and then they used their own media network to spread the messages on other social media channels. So it's part of the Russian playbook to use these state-sponsored media outlets to for their strategy on election meddling, on democracy meddling, what they are trying to do is not to. So they are trying actually to strengthen this camp within a specific national population, which is critical of the government, which is critical of mainstream traditional media, and give them that kind of food for thought. They think actually they are deserving, but if and all these claims YouTube made against Russia today were backed by fact checkers, certified fact checkers, organizations who did this. So it was not purely based on YouTube's assessment, but pretty much they had this. Fact checkers checking this, and it was again not just one or two, but plenty of incidents on this. The European Commission, for instance, has also an own working group within the European External Action Service, which is looking at this strategic communication approach by Russia, which you can see in all the countries. But that has been very popular here. And in a way, I would put it in this context that what happened here was the same thing what happened to Donald Trump when he was deplatformed for the very same reason: spreading misinformation, spreading disinformation, insulting violence. And what RT and Russia Today did here in Germany actually was very close to that.
And that's a very important point that you make, that YouTube, at the end of the day, is part of the Alphabet Inc. It's a private company, and the accusations that are being levelled against them by Russia are that the German government is being involved in this. Now, the German government, of course, has denied this. But there seems to be coming a point where social media companies need to differentiate themselves in a way to say, although it's written clearly in their terms and conditions, I'm sure, they need to differentiate themselves from state actors, and because otherwise in the future a situation like this could turn very ugly.
Absolutely, and I would even go beyond, because the thing is that, of course, you could make that point to say, okay, it should not be up to private companies to decide who has the right for freedom of speech, or who can have, who actually should be censored. So we know that Mark Zuckerberg, in a prominent testimony in front of the U.S. Congress, said, "We are not the arbiter of truth," and that's true. The thing is that we have a lack of legislation around the world, especially in democracies, to define what is free speech and where does free speech end and where does actually disinformation starts. Currently, in the European Union, we have this process of the so-called Digital Services Act and the Digital Market Act presented by the European Commission. In this, both pieces of legislation is exactly defined what should be allowed and what should not be allowed, when content moderation should apply, when platforms have to delete content. We have in Germany also a law which is called the Network Enforcement Law, which also is a law against hate speech. We have in France a law against disinformation. So you have plenty of these national laws, but in the end, actually, the international community needs to agree on proper standards of what constitutes disinformation, what is legal content and freedom of speech, and what actually, where does hate speech start and disinformation as well.
Absolutely. Well, this another fascinating conversation to be continued. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have a very busy schedule today. Olaf Benke, thank you so much. Now, YouTube's new rules on misinformation mean any videos containing misinformation about vaccine that's been approved by health authorities will be removed. The company said it's removed 130,000 pieces of content related to COVID vaccine misinformation since last year, as part of a total of 1 million videos removed by the platform for spreading COVID-related misinformation. We'll see how this information warfare affects the social media's company relations with countries like Russia. For now, let's move on to our final topic and speak about the continuing humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray region. 10 months of conflict in Ethiopia between the country's defence force and the Tigray People's Liberation Front has left hundreds of thousands of people displaced and thousands more dead. How did the conflict start? Let's find out. The Emergency Relief Coordinator of United Nations stated that it's very likely that famine has taken hold in Ethiopia's Tigray region, where a 3-month de facto blockade has restricted aid deliveries to 10% of what's needed in the war-torn region.
The United Nations humanitarian chief said that the humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray region is spiralling out of control.
In Ethiopia, the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, said that after 11 months of conflict and 3 months of de facto blockades, the humanitarian crisis in Tigray is spiraling out of control. He said that 5.2 million people still require food aid, with 400,000 people living in famine-like conditions.
According to the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, the situation is likely to get worse after 11 months of conflict and 3 months of a de facto blockade. The war in Ethiopia began last November on the brink of harvest in Tigray, and the UN has said that at least half of the coming harvest will fail. Witnesses have said that Ethiopian and allied forces destroyed or looted food sources.
I'm now joined live from Minneapolis in the United States by Adayo Dawano, who's an Ethiopian activist. Adayo, thanks for joining us again here today on The Edge. We're still sadly needing to talk about the situation in the north of Ethiopia, in the Tigray region, the humanitarian crisis, and now the harsh remarks from the UN humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, saying that it's a stain on our conscience that this is happening again. What can you tell us about the situation there?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Well, as we both know that we have been talking about this thing for quite a time now. The situation is not coming to a solution at this point. There is a greater humanitarian need. It is so sickening to wake up every morning and then to learn the gravity of the situation in Tigray, and not only in Tigray, but has gone into state of Afar and Amara and Wallo. So the situation has not been able to be contained. And the crisis is just unfolding. It is very much sad to know that mothers, children, elderly continues to suffer in this conflict in the region. So it is quite true that the crisis is still ongoing. However, the assistance from the governments and from humanitarian agencies has been delivered. However, there's still not enough. Enough has not been done. And for one is the Martin's account is kind of a little bit conflicting, because not that long ago, Martin goes to accuse the government for not helping with the delivery of food. However, the U.S. aid last month have indicated that how this food has been stolen by the TPLF in the region. And again, the United Nations that he's part of have also have highlighted how out of 466 trucks that was headed to Tigray to deliver food, out of all that vehicles, only about 38 were able to return. So you might have a food at disposal to deliver, but if you have no vehicle, it's an issue. So there are so much trucks that went to the Tigray region, but not being able to be returned to deliver more food. So the issue is just not the conflict, but the means of delivering the humanitarian aid also has become a major issue.
I can't help when I'm looking at the pictures of what's happening in Ethiopia again, I can't help thinking back 40 years, watching the same pictures. Then I was watching them in black and white. Today we're watching them in colour. This situation, you've told me before, there are similarities in the background to what's happening there, but it's. I think the word is criminal that it's happening again, and both. On the one hand, the Tigray Liberation Front, you're saying, is responsible. Others are saying that the government is responsible. At the end of the day, the government is the government, and they need to do something to break this crisis.
Absolutely. I think the government has already been doing its best so far. But what we don't get to hear much often is that the international communities are not holding the TPLF group more responsible in the regions. At this point, they control Tigray. Therefore, they must have the will to allow the government to help the people. The Ethiopian government knows that Tigrayans are its citizens. They do care about the citizens. They do care about the mothers and children in the region. The war is between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF military force that is currently controlling Tigray. So in a process when the government is trying to provide so much assistance to the region, the TPLF are exploiting these resources to be able to gain more strength to fight the government. So what we see is that there's no enough will from both sides. When the government is willing, when the government chooses to stop the war, the military continues to engage. The TPLF continue to wage war. So we need to understand who is actually truly seeking for peace to come, who is actually in desire to allow the humanitarian aid to be delivered. We have to understand that. Furthermore, the international community has continuously be biased on this conflict. The international community continues to hold the government responsible, continue to accuse, but never accepted the fact that TPLF are also contributing to the ongoing crisis to a great extent. That has been ignored. For example, we hear the United States preaching peace and trying to find a solution in the region. However, they never accepted or willing to even admit that the TPLF is a problem in the region. The TPLF is an institution that the Ethiopian government and its population have called a terrorist. America is not willing to denounce that very fact. However, the international media continue to propagate as if the conflict is the government repressing the region, blocking aid from going to that route. So there's a bias going on. So when Martin was continuously talk about how the government is not delivering, how the government is not helping out, and then how he framed as if this famine or this hunger, this humanitarian crisis is leaving a stain on our conscience, the world need to understand that TPLF have left chronic stain on Ethiopia's population criminally. They have committed so much atrocity in the country that they have left so much stain in Ethiopians' conscience.
But isn't it the case that the TPLF were or their representatives have been running affairs in that region for decades, and I'm sure the question mark that everybody has is, was war actually necessary? Was there not some diplomatic solution to this 1 year ago before the conflict started? And that, of course, started at a time of harvest, which began to upset the food needs for the region. So isn't the first mistake the one made by the government to enter a period of conflict without seeing a way through to avoid humanitarian crisis, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a reflection of 40 years ago?
What the government did is what any other country, a sovereign country, would do when its military has been attacked. What happened is an act of treason. The TPLF group that left the capital due to the popular uprising started the war. They activated the war. They attacked the sitting federal government, and that's how everything broke out. Whatever that happened after that could have been reevaluated, how the government approached it and how the TPLF willing to engage or have engaged to this point. But the problem is right now, it's not about how it started. Right. How can we ease the crisis? The crisis, in order for this thing to happen, the international community needs to be fair and just. They don't need to accuse one group and then cover or turn a blind eye to the other partners. Therefore, the minute the international community wanted to be fair, the minute the medias are misinforming the international communities, there is so much propagandist media out there that continue to dismiss the government. Martin's quotes in regarding to the conflict is just pretty much politically driven. I mean, we know that the United States funds the UN, and he is the aid chief. Therefore, he echoes the same rhetoric that the American government just proposed a sanction. It just goes hand in hand. Is there a will truly to solve the issue? Is there a will to tell the truth and truly deliver the humanitarian need? That is the question. We cannot propagate goodwill, but at the meantime, keep it honest and just. Just recently, the Deputy Prime Minister was at the UN General Assembly in New York, in which he clearly addresses and explains to the world that the Ethiopian government is willing to negotiate, willing to sit down and have a dialogue and talk and bring the absolute solution, not by force, not by the character in which the American government wanted to impose and force the Ethiopian government through sanctions and fear and then economic hardship, and then literally twist Ethiopia's government's hand to submit to sit down and talk.
Well, it seems that people need to lay down their weapons from whichever side they are, and they need to find solution to stop more people dying unnecessarily from hunger. Edouard,
that is true.
Thank you so much for joining us today and bringing us up to date. Now, the United Nations in Ethiopia said on the 16th of September that only 38 out of 466 trucks that entered Tigray since the 12th of July had returned. Meanwhile, the World Food Programme in Ethiopia posted on Twitter that 61 commercial trucks had left Tigray in recent days, and they expect more to depart in coming weeks. We hope that these trucks can reach the people so desperately in need. Our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story shared with the hashtag Tigray. And here's what you've been having to say about Tigray on Twitter. Tigray says Ethiopian security forces are arresting Tigrayans on the streets, cafes, public places, workplaces and in their homes. The arbitrary arrests of Tigrayans in Ethiopia must end. And Ermi Panda says that 900,000 people in Tigray are experiencing man-made famine. They are dying of starvation. Ethiopian government is wielding hunger as a weapon in Tigray. Tigray can't wait, in need of airdrop food to Tigray now. And Johannes says over 5.4 million people in Tigray have nothing to eat. That is more than the population of Norway going hungry every single day. This is genocide by starvation. And let's take a look at our video of the day, which explains the meaning of internally displaced people, like millions of Tigrayans. And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boynes. Stay tuned, as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.